You know those stories about nightmare neighbors? The ones who make you question every life choice that led you to live within 500 feet of them. Well, let me introduce you to Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our homeowners association, HOA. A woman so entitled she probably thinks the sun rises every morning just to highlight her perfectly trimmed hedges. Karen wasn't just your average HOA busybody. She was the Michael Jordan of meddling, the Picasso of pettiness, the Shakespeare of sheer audacity. And unfortunately for me, she had decided that my sprinkler system was her personal water park. Now, I'm not a confrontational guy. I'm Ryan, your average suburban dude who just wants to mow his lawn in peace and maybe crack open a cold beer on the weekends. But Karen? Oh no, Karen had other plans. She had this uncanny ability to turn even the most mundane neighborhood interactions into a full-blown power struggle. And her latest obsession? Stealing my sprinkler water. Yes, you heard that right. This woman was siphoning off my water like some sort of suburban pirate, all while maintaining that smug, "I'm better than you" smile that could curdle milk. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. One day, I noticed my water bill was higher than usual. At first, I chalked it up to summer heat and my slightly overzealous attempts at keeping my lawn greener than my neighbor Steve's. Because let's face it, Steve's lawn is an eyesore. But then I started noticing something strange. My sprinklers would mysteriously turn on at odd hours when I wasn't home. And not just for my lawn. Oh no, Karen's garden, her flower beds, and even her driveway were suddenly looking suspiciously hydrated. First, I couldn't believe it. Who does that? Who just takes someone else's water without asking? But then again, this was Karen we were talking about. The woman who once filed a formal complaint because someone parked their car too close to the mailbox. Subtlety was not her strong suit. So I decided to investigate. One Saturday morning, armed with nothing but a cup of coffee and a growing sense of indignation, I set up camp by my living room window and waited for the inevitable. Sure enough, right around 10 a.m., prime gardening time, Karen strutted out of her house wearing her signature wide-brimmed sun hat and wielding a watering can like it was Excalibur. She marched straight over to my yard, bent down by the sprinkler valve, and turned it on as if she owned the place. I was stunned. This wasn't some accidental misuse or misunderstanding. This was premeditated water theft in broad daylight. Karen didn't even try to hide it. She acted like she had every right to be there, like my sprinkler system was just another amenity provided by the HOA for her exclusive use. At first, I thought about confronting her right then and there, but honestly, watching her parade around with stolen water felt like witnessing some kind of absurd performance art piece about entitlement. She'd water her roses with dramatic flair, pausing occasionally to admire her handiwork as if she were Manet painting his garden at Giverny. Meanwhile, I sat there fuming in silence, torn between rage and disbelief. The next day, I decided to give Karen the benefit of the doubt, a mistake I would soon regret. Maybe she didn't realize what she was doing. Maybe she thought it was communal water provided by the HOA. So, I approached her politely, well, as politely as one can when dealing with someone who's essentially stealing from you, and asked if she'd been using my sprinkler system. Her response? A condescending laugh followed by, "Oh, Ryan, don't be so dramatic. It's just water. Besides, your lawn always looks so lush. I figured you wouldn't mind sharing a little." Sharing? As if this were some kind of neighborly potluck and not outright theft. But Karen wasn't done yet. She launched into a lecture about how community spirit meant helping each other out, and how I should be grateful that she cared enough about appearances to keep our neighborhood looking pristine. Besides, she added with a smirk, you wouldn't want your property value to drop because of an unkempt lawn next door, would you? That was it. The moment I realized Karen wasn't just oblivious. She was weaponizing entitlement like some kind of suburban supervillain. And worse yet, she genuinely believed she was doing me a favor. Over the next few weeks, Karen's sprinkler piracy escalated from occasional theft to full-blown dependency. It wasn't just her garden anymore. She started using my hose to wash her car, a gleaming white SUV with vanity plates that read Der Edelfool, which felt ironic given how ungrateful she actually was. Once, I caught her filling up an inflatable kiddie pool for her grandkids using my water supply while loudly complaining about how cheap The HOA had become for not installing communal fountains in every yard. I tried everything: polite conversations, which were met with eye rolls, passive-aggressive notes, which mysteriously disappeared, even locking my sprinkler valve, which she somehow managed to bypass. Karen was unstoppable, a force of nature fueled by entitlement and an apparent lack of shame. But here's the thing about living in an HOA-governed neighborhood. Every petty grievance eventually comes back to haunt you in paperwork form. The HOA bylaws were a labyrinthine mess of rules and regulations covering everything from acceptable mailbox designs to approved paint colors for your front door. But nowhere did they address unauthorized sprinkler usage. When I brought up Karen's antics at the monthly HOA meeting, the board members looked at me like I'd just asked them to solve world hunger. "Well," said one particularly bored-looking board member named Linda, "technically there's no rule against sharing water, unless it causes damage or disruption." Damage or disruption? Was skyrocketing water bills not disruptive enough? But Karen sat there smugly during the entire meeting, as if daring anyone to challenge her reign. By this point, I knew two things. One, Karen wasn't going to stop unless someone forced her to. And the HOA wasn't going to lift a finger unless actual chaos ensued. After the HOA meeting ended in a spectacular display of bureaucratic apathy, I realized something crucial. Karen wasn't just stealing my water, she was stealing my sanity. It was time to escalate. But before I could unleash my inner suburban avenger, I needed to do my homework. Revenge, after all, is an art form, and I wasn't about to let Karen turn me into some amateur doodler in the margins of her entitled masterpiece. The first step? Research. I dove headfirst into the HOA bylaws like a man possessed, armed with nothing but a highlighter and a growing sense of indignation. Let me tell you, those bylaws were a labyrinth of legalese so convoluted it made tax law look like a coloring book. There were rules about mailbox placement, acceptable shades of beige for house exteriors, and even restrictions on the number of garden gnomes allowed per yard, 3, in case you were wondering. But not a single word about unauthorized sprinkler usage. Karen had found her loophole, and she was exploiting it with all the finesse of a corporate lawyer on caffeine. But while the bylaws failed me, Google did not. Turns out there's an entire online community dedicated to petty revenge stories. A treasure trove of inspiration for disgruntled suburbanites like myself. One guy had rigged his neighbor's car to blast polka music every time they started it. Another had filled their office rival's desk drawers with glitter bombs that detonated upon opening. These people were my heroes, my guiding lights in the dark abyss of HOA tyranny, and they gave me an idea, a beautifully ridiculous idea. Before I could execute my plan, though, I needed supplies. This meant a trip to the hardware store, where I spent an embarrassing amount of time explaining to the clerk why I needed industrial-grade dye and several gallons of vinegar. "Big gardening project," I lied, though the smirk on his face suggested he wasn't buying it. Still, he rang me up without question, probably because he'd seen enough suburban drama to know when not to get involved. Back home, I got to work. The plan was simple yet diabolical. Fill my sprinkler system with a mixture of vinegar and bright blue dye, the kind that stains everything it touches for days. Every time Karen turned on my sprinklers, her pristine lawn would transform into a patchwork quilt of chaos that no amount of HOA-approved landscaping could fix. It was petty, yes, but also poetic, a fitting tribute to her reign of entitlement. The hardest part was waiting for Karen to take the bait. She was nothing if not predictable, though. By Saturday morning, she was back at it again, strutting across her driveway like she owned the place, which she didn't, and turning on my sprinklers without hesitation. What happened next was nothing short of magical. At first, Karen didn't notice anything unusual. She stood there watering her roses with the same smug expression she always wore, the one that made you want to slap her sun hat off her head and yell, "This isn't your water." But then she looked down at her shoes, her white shoes, and saw they were now a vibrant shade of snuff blue. Her reaction was priceless. She screamed, a high-pitched wail that could have shattered glass, and dropped the hose like it had suddenly turned into a venomous snake. Then she looked at her lawn, which was rapidly transforming into what can only be described as an abstract art installation gone horribly wrong. The roses? Blue. The hydrangeas? Blue. Even her driveway had streaks of blue running through it like veins in marble. Karen stormed over to my house faster than I thought humanly possible for someone wearing heels on grass. She banged on my door with such ferocity that I half expected it to splinter into pieces. When I opened it, calmly sipping coffee because revenge tastes better with caffeine, she launched into a tirade so incoherent it sounded like someone trying to recite Shakespeare while being chased by bees. "What did you do?" she screeched, waving her stained hands at me like some sort of deranged smuff wizard. "Oh," I said innocently. "You mean my sprinklers? The ones you've been using without permission." Karen's face turned redder than her roses used to be before they became casualties in this war of attrition. "You ruined my garden, my driveway, my shoes." "Well," I replied with a shrug, "maybe you shouldn't have been stealing water from your neighbors." She sputtered for a moment before regaining enough composure to threaten me with legal action. A bold move considering she just admitted to trespassing and theft in front of half the neighborhood, who had gathered outside to watch the spectacle. "I'll take this up with the HOA," she declared dramatically, as if they were some kind of suburban Supreme Court. "Good luck," I said cheerfully. "I checked the bylaws. They don't cover sprinkler sabotage." Karen stomped off in defeat, or at least as much defeat as someone like Karen could muster, and spent the rest of the day scrubbing her driveway with what looked like industrial-strength bleach while muttering curses under her breath loud enough for me to hear from inside my house. But here's the best part. Karen didn't just lose this battle. She lost her reputation as well. Word spread quickly about what happened, because let's face it, suburban gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi, and soon everyone knew about Blue Lawn Karen. She became a running joke at HOA meetings and neighborhood barbecues alike. People even started calling her driveway Smaff Alley. And while Karen tried desperately to reclaim her dignity by filing complaints against me, all of which were dismissed, she couldn't escape the stain, both literal and metaphorical, that now defined her existence. As for me, my water bill returned to normal, my lawn stayed green and unmolested, and I became something of a local legend. A hero who stood up against HOA tyranny with nothing but vinegar and dye as his weapons. Sure, it wasn't exactly noble or mature, but damn if it wasn't satisfying. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks or additions. If you thought Karen would take her defeat gracefully, then you clearly don't know Karen. This is a woman who once argued with a Girl Scout over the unfair pricing of Thin Mints and demanded a discount for buying in bulk. No, Karen wasn't the type to back down. If anything, my little sprinkler stunt had only fueled her resolve to make my life as miserable as possible. And let me tell you, she came at me with all the fury of a PTA mom whose kid didn't make the honor roll. The very next day, I woke up to find an official-looking letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, of course, because where else would Karen turn when her personal crusade for dominance hit a roadblock? The letter accused me of willful property damage, creating a public nuisance, and my personal favorite, undermining neighborhood harmony. Undermining neighborhood harmony? As if Karen hadn't already done that by existing. Naturally, I wasn't about to let this slide. I marched straight to the HOA office, which was really just a sad little room in the community center that smelled faintly of old coffee and despair, and demanded an explanation. Linda, the HOA secretary and part-time human embodiment of apathy, barely looked up from her Sudoku puzzle as she handed me a copy of Karen's complaint. "She says you dyed her lawn blue," Linda said flatly, as if this were a perfectly normal sentence to say out loud. "Her lawn," I replied, feigning innocence. "I don't know what she's talking about. I've been busy minding my own business. Something Karen might want to try sometime." Linda sighed and pushed her glasses up her nose. "Look, Ryan, we both know how Karen is. But technically, she's filed an official complaint, so we have to investigate." "Investigate what?" I asked incredulously. "She's been stealing my water for weeks. Shouldn't that be the issue here?" Linda shrugged in that infuriating way people do when they've already decided they don't care about your problems. "Do you have proof?" "Proof? Oh, I had proof all right. Hours of video footage from the security cameras I'd installed after Karen's first water heist. But did I really want to share it? There was something deeply satisfying about letting Karen dig her own grave while I watched from the sidelines with popcorn in hand. "Fine," I said finally. Investigate away. But don't come crying to me when you realize she's been using my sprinklers like they're on tap at a Vegas buffet. With that, I left the HOA office and returned home, where I found Karen standing on her now infamous blue driveway with a clipboard in hand. She was taking pictures, presumably for some kind of evidence file, and muttering under her breath about neighborhood standards and property values. When she saw me pull into my driveway, she waved the clipboard at me like it was a weapon. "This isn't over," she shouted. "Oh, I know," I called back cheerfully. "You're like a bad rash. Impossible to get rid of." Karen huffed dramatically and stomped back into her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled her overpriced wind chimes. For a moment, I considered letting things go, taking the high road and leaving Karen to stew in her own self-righteousness. But then I remembered all those mornings spent watching her steal my water while pretending not to see me glaring at her from my window. No, Karen wasn't getting off that easy. The next phase of my plan required precision timing and just the right amount of absurdity. First, I ordered several dozen garden gnomes online, because if there's one thing HOAs hate more than unapproved paint colors, it's excessive lawn ornaments. Then I enlisted the help of my neighbor Steve. Yes, that's Steve, the one with the ugly lawn, to help me set everything up under cover of darkness. By morning, Karen's yard was transformed into what can only be described as a gnome apocalypse. There were gnomes everywhere, on her lawn, in her flower beds, even perched on top of her mailbox like tiny ceramic sentinels guarding their turf. Each one held a little sign with messages like, "Keep off our water," and "Hydration thieves beware." It was glorious. The best part? The HOA bylaws explicitly allowed up to 3 garden gnomes per property, but they didn't say anything about whose property they had to be on. Technically speaking, I hadn't broken any rules. I'd simply redistributed my allowable gnomes in a way that happened to inconvenience Karen. When she stepped outside that morning and saw what we'd done, her reaction was everything I'd hoped for and more. She screamed, a long guttural sound that echoed through the neighborhood like some kind of primal howl, and immediately started ripping up gnomes left and right. But for every gnome she removed, Steve and I replaced 2 more under cover of daylight. By noon, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch the spectacle unfold. People were taking pictures, laughing openly at Karen's increasingly frantic attempts to rid herself of the gnome infestation. Even Linda from the HOA showed up at one point, not to enforce any rules but simply because someone had told her it was too funny to miss. "This is harassment," Karen shrieked at me as she hurled yet another gnome into a trash bag. "No," I replied calmly. "This is art." Eventually, Karen gave up and retreated inside her house with what little dignity she had left. The gnomes stayed put for another week before mysteriously disappearing overnight, though rumor has it Steve relocated them to his backyard as part of some kind of bizarre tribute. After the Great Gnome War of Suburbia, I thought Karen might finally wave the white flag. Surely, even she couldn't recover from the humiliation of being outsmarted by a bunch of ceramic figurines wielding tiny picket signs. But, as I had come to learn, Karen was like a cockroach in a nuclear apocalypse, impossible to kill and annoyingly persistent. For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. Karen didn't storm over to my house, didn't file any more complaints with the HOA, and didn't even glare at me from her driveway like she usually did while pretending to water her plants, which, let's be honest, were probably still recovering from the Smuff Lawn incident. It was almost peaceful, but deep down I knew Karen wasn't done. She was plotting something. I could feel it in the air, like the faint smell of burnt toast before your smoke alarm goes off. And sure enough, Karen struck again. This time, she went straight for my reputation. One morning, I woke up to find flyers plastered all over the neighborhood. They were taped to mailboxes, shoved under windshield wipers, and even stapled to trees like some kind of suburban propaganda campaign. The flyers featured a grainy photo of my face, taken from what I assume was Karen's security camera, with bold letters that read, "I.S. this your neighbor? Warning, serial troublemaker." The text below was an unhinged manifesto accusing me of everything from vandalizing private property, to undermining community values, to harboring dangerous gnomes. She even threw in some nonsense about how my lawn wasn't up to HOA standards. which was rich coming from someone whose driveway still had faint blue streaks that looked like a toddler had gone rogue with finger paint. Couldn't believe it. Karen had escalated from petty theft to full-blown slander. And for what? Because I dared to defend my sprinkler system? Because I refused to bow down to her reign of terror? Well, if she wanted war, she'd get one. But first, I needed allies. Luckily for me, Karen wasn't exactly popular in the neighborhood. Her years of micromanaging everyone's lives had earned her plenty of enemies. People who were just waiting for someone brave or stupid enough to stand up to her. So I rallied the troops. Steve, of Ugly Lawn fame, Linda from the HOA, who secretly hated Karen but pretended not to for professional reasons, and even a few other neighbors who had been victims of Karen's wrath over the years. Together, we hatched a plan, a final act of suburban rebellion that would put Karen in her place once and for all. Step 1. Expose Karen's hypocrisy. Using my trusty security camera footage, which I had carefully saved after every water theft incident, we compiled a highlight reel of Karen's greatest hits, complete with timestamps, close-ups, and dramatic music added by Steve's teenage son who fancied himself an amateur filmmaker. The video showed Karen sneaking into my yard at all hours, turning on my sprinklers like she was cracking a safe, and even dragging her hose across my lawn without so much as a glance in my direction. Step 2. Distribute the evidence. We uploaded the video to every social media platform known to man, Facebook groups, Nextdoor threads, even TikTok, because apparently suburban drama is highly entertaining to Gen Z. Within hours, the video went viral. Not just in our neighborhood, but across the entire town. People couldn't get enough of Sprinkler Karen, and soon she became a meme, photoshopped into scenes from pirate movies, Captain Waterstealer, edited into infomercials for garden hoses, Karen's discount hydration services, and even turned into gifs captioned, "When you want free water but forget it's illegal." Step 3. Let karma do its thing. As expected, Karen was furious when she found out about the video. She stormed over to my house again and demanded that I take it down immediately, or else she'd sue me for defamation. But here's the thing about defamation lawsuits. They don't work when everything you're accused of is true and backed up by video evidence. Good luck with that, I said cheerfully as Karen fumed on my porch like an angry teapot about to whistle. The fallout was glorious. Not only did Karen lose whatever shred of credibility she had left in the neighborhood, but she also became an unwelcome celebrity in town. People started avoiding her at grocery stores. Kids whispered about her at school. Even the HOA board began distancing themselves from her antics. "We don't condone theft," Linda said diplomatically at the next meeting. And as if that weren't enough, someone printed t-shirts with Sprinkler Karen memes on them and sold them at local events, proceeds going toward community projects like fixing Steve's lawn. Finally, as for me, life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after taking down suburbia's most infamous villain. My sprinklers stayed untouched, my water bill remained reasonable, and my lawn flourished under its newfound freedom from theft. Sure, there were still occasional passive-aggressive notes left in my mailbox. "Your lawn is too green, it's suspicious." But those were easy enough to ignore. In the end, justice prevailed. Not because I fought back with anger or aggression, but because I fought back with creativity and humor. Sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is not by stooping to their level, but by rising above it, and maybe throwing in some garden gnomes for good measure. So if you ever find yourself dealing with your own version of Karen, a neighbor who thinks rules don't apply to them or who treats your property like their personal playground, remember this story. Stand your ground, get creative with your revenge, legally of course, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed meme. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks or additions.